Hi, Tony Silvestri here again. For the second of my videos for the Virtual Choir 6 Think Tank, this one is entitled 3 Essential Elements for Writing Effective Lyric Poetry. In this video, I would like to talk about my process of writing a lyric poem, to let you in behind the poet's pen, as it were, and give you a couple of sort of basic tips for what I think about when I write a lyric poem, and it might help those of you who are poets yourselves to think about writing poetry that's meant to be sung. There are 3 essential elements, as I've identified them. These are crucial elements that I think about as I'm crafting a poem, and we'll talk about those 3 elements in much more detail in a moment. But first, I'd like to thank Eric and the team behind Virtual Choir 6 for inviting me to participate in these Think Tank videos. And I'd also like to thank you for watching, and also for your participation in the choir itself. I look forward to recording my own video here and posting it here pretty soon. So there are 3 elements that I try to keep in mind as I'm writing a poem for a composer, writing a poem that's meant to be sung. A lyric poem is different than a so-called regular poem in that it is crafted with the intention that a composer is going to set it to music and that a choir or singers are going to sing it. That means that the craft of writing that poem has to be a process of intentionality. I have to think very carefully about the words I use, about the structure of the poem, about the singability of the vowels, and so on. And so in preparing this talk for you, I've kind of boiled it down to 3 essential elements. And the first is that your poem must have, as all poems should, an essential human truth that it is trying to communicate. Second, your poem needs to have a programmatic structure. And third, it has to contain words that are singable and lines that are singable. So, essential human truth, a programmatic structure, and singability. These are the 3 essential elements to an effective lyric poem. The first element is that your poem has to have an essential human truth. Now, all poems express some basic human truth. They take an emotion, they take an observation of the world around the poet, or an observation of the inner world of the poet, and they lay that observation out in crafted language. The poet observes keenly the world around them, or the world inside their own spirit, and they try to discover truths about themselves and about the world, and that's what the poem is trying to express. If the truth that you're trying to express is an intensely personal one, then what I try to do is I try to scrub away the details of the poem that make it personal to me, in an effort to make it more universal, to sort of take my observation and universalize it so that anyone in the choir or in the audience can latch onto it a meaning that is personal to them. In my process, what I often do is I create a brief prose poem, sort of like a fortune cookie version of the human truth that I'm trying to express in the poem. Just so I'm clear about where I'm going with this particular poem. Sometimes it changes as the writing process proceeds, but more often than not, if I start with a prose version, just a brief paragraph version of what I want this poem to be about, then I can more easily stay on track and keep it both authentic but also universalizable as well. So the first of these essential elements is that your poem has to have some sort of essential human truth. That's my cat, Smokey, that is meowing to be in the video. The second essential truth is your poem has to have a programmatic structure. And what I mean by this is that composers need a structure that is conducive to producing a choral octavo. So I have to be mindful of the composer's needs, in the creation of that poem, just as the composer is mindful of the audience's needs and how to program a particular work of music. A choral octavo is like a little journey, a little 4-minute or 6-minute journey. It needs to have a beginning and a middle and an end, very much like a hero's journey from a book or a fairy tale or from a movie. A hero's journey presents a world, and then the hero goes on this quest, and there are conflicts and lessons learned and a transformative moment at a dramatic time. There's a return home. So the poem has to give these elements, these story elements or programmatic elements to the composer. Somewhere in its expression of human truth, there has to be some sort of transformative moment. I call this transformative moment the volta, the turning of the poem. If the poem is making a set of statements, then the volta will be where the poet asks a question instead. Or if the poem is confident in its tone, the volta will then be more introspective and introduce doubt. If the poem is dark, then the volta will be where the light begins to shine through in the poetry. Now, where does the volta belong in a poem that's mindful of its programmatic structure? I try to place the volta in the part of the poem where artists have been splitting their works into two for millennia, and that would be the golden mean, the golden ratio. Around 60% of the way through the poem is where the volta is going to need to go. 60% through the audience's journey, that's where, or the hero's journey, that's where the conflict with the dragon happens. That's where the great aha moment, the transformative moment occurs. It's actually 61.8% through, to be geeky about it. This is where the composer needs to change keys, or the composer wants a change in tone color, or a switch to the minor mode, or a change in orchestration or voicing to keep the journey alive. You might have done two things almost the same, and then the third time you do it, it has to be somewhat different. And so I try to build the volta into the poem exactly where it needs to be. Think about the standard, the sort of American standard Broadway song or torch song. It has verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, chorus. The bridge is something different musically. It's a shift in tone, and it occurs right where the golden mean is in the lyric structure. In a 4-part poem, the volta will come in part 3. In a 3-part poem, it'll come right as you transition from the second part of the poem into the third part of the poem. So building that programmatic structure into the text of the poem gives the composer one fewer thing that they have to do. It does a little bit of the heavy lifting for the composer. And the final element in an effective lyric poem is what I call singability. The poet has to be mindful of the sound of the words, the flow of the words, the mouth feel, remembering that these words must be sung rather than spoken, and that they must be sung by a choir rather than by a solo singer. Soloists can sing almost any text, but a choir, in order to create that unified tone, there are certain rules that I try not to break when I'm writing a poem for choir. Remembering that it has to be sung forces me to remember to pay attention to consonants and vowels and where they are in the line in order to help create vocal tone. I try to avoid consonant traps like crunchy consonants, SKs and STs and things, especially at the end of a line. I try to avoid vowel traps like diphthongs, or violations of the sort of phonesthetic conventions of the order in which vowels should go to make a word sound good. There are ways that singers can compensate for this. Every once in a while there's a poem that's not written as a lyric poem that a composer has set, and so there might be an unsingable vowel in a particular part of a vocal line. where you kind of cheat the shape of your mouth in order to slightly alter that vowel so that it's more singable. One technique that I love about that is to think of the word Earth, the planet Earth, but think of it pronounced with a very fine British accent, Earth. That vowel, is the sort of root of all the different vowel sounds that come off of it. So a, e, I, o, u, all pronounced from that place of Earth. That helps you to sing high in your range in a vowel that might not be comfortable at that part of the range. Some words are simply more singable than others. I like to aim for a kind of speakable rhythm. Eric talked about the push and pull of the words in Sing Gently. You want to have the poem flow like normal speech. You don't want it to sound like a Dalek is trying to pronounce it. 3-syllable words with the accent on the first syllable, those I think are the most delicious words to sing. Words like trembling or symphony, Figaro. Most Italian words are like that, which is why Italian is such a wonderful language to sing. Happiness, Tylenol. A lot of the brand names for pharmaceuticals are 3-syllable words with the first syllable accented, and there's a reason for that. Tolkien's writing is full of phonesthetic conventions. I think he was the one who first coined that term. Again, 3-syllable words that have accented first syllables. Elbereth, Legolas, Aragorn, Arwen, Saruman, Erebor, Moria, Isengard. Middle-earth is full of those sorts of beautiful, delicious words. I tried to include colorful or exceptionally descriptive words instead of simpler words. They're just inherently more musical. A couple of examples, the word verdant instead of green, or the word spreading instead of the word flat, the word blessed instead of the word good. These introduce more syllables and they're more colorful words. There's a lot more musicality in those words and more music to come out of the imagery and the mental associations of those more complex or more colorful words. There are just some delicious words that I love including in my poetry. Dreaming, shadow, whisper, heaven, voices, music, gently, always. These are beautiful and delicious words that flow right from the tongue, and they're fun to sing and fun to say. Word order also matters. We want the word order to sound fluent, to sound natural. This often happens when someone is Google translating or doing a literal word-for-word translation from a different language. It often puts words in the wrong sort of order, and there is a proper order for, especially for descriptive adjectives. Once you get to the noun, there's an order for those adjectives. Also, word order can affect the apparent age of the text or make it more or less formal. Let me give you an example from Sing Gently. The second line is, "May our voice be soft." But what if it was, "May soft be our voice"? A little different cadence, but "may soft be our voice" sounds to me more archaic, more formal, more ancient sounding. I also try to beware of forcing the composer's hand and putting the composer in too narrow a box. Let me give you an example of that. Let's say I'm talking about voices rising to infinity. I could write a line like, we rise unto infinity, right? It's a beautiful line of poetry when you're reading it off of a page or when you're delivering it in a poetry reading. But that line given to a composer, we rise, almost forces an ascending line. We rise unto infinity. Now the voices are singing at the highest part of their range and on the word infinity. And that's a very, very difficult thing to do. I would try never to do that with a composer. Instead, I might change it to an ah vowel at the end. So if I wanted repetition and a singable vowel, I might rework the line to unto infinity. Infinity we rise, right? It repeats the word infinity, which allows the composer a lot of different word painting to happen. And it ends, it's an ascending line, and it ends with the word rise on a nice ah vowel, which would be much more singable. So I'm always trying to be mindful of that sort of singability as I write. So the keys to all of this are mindfulness and intentionality at all levels of the creation of a poem when you're writing lyric poetry. And keeping in mind those three essential elements, a human truth, a basic human truth to communicate, a sense of programmatic structure, and a mindfulness to the singability of the words and the vowels and consonants that you're creating. I'd like you to think about Eric's beautiful poem for Sing Gently. Identify what flows musically in the words, identify those delicious words that he's asked us to sing, think about its structure and the wonderful interplay between the structure of the poem itself and the music that Eric put to it. All these things will help you be mindful of singability and of lyricality, if that's a word, in the poetry that you read, in the poetry that you write, and especially in the poetry that you sing. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I look forward to meeting with you and answering your questions in the next video.